It's the end of the day with Ray. Hello, my friends. Well, if you look on the gigantic, sharp interactive board, you're going to see a huge picture of the Doyles. Folks, I think this is a fantastic picture, and I saw this during the holidays. But Dan Doyle Sr., Dan Doyle Jr., you know, it's pretty good, amazing story in our industry. And we know that the Doyles know what they're doing in our industry. And we also know that the Doyles don't need to do anything in our industry from this point on. I mean, they're already pretty wealthy, one would assume. So why are they doing this? Why are they hanging around? You know, Staples bought DEX Imaging. This February will be 5 years. As they go into the 6th year of that acquisition, why would they hang around? They don't need the money. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, I believe the Doyles are hanging around because they want to build an empire. They want to change the industry. They want to change the landscape of the industry. And they're smart enough to realize that the landscape's going to change with or without their permission. They might as well be the architects of that change. And so I want to congratulate the Doyles for all they've done for the industry and a fantastic success story regarding DEX Imaging. But now I want to share some thoughts on what's next for DEX. You know, in 2018, I came to my audience and I said, hey, either Office Depot or Staples will buy a mega deal, or Staples bought DEX Imaging. I had a vision of how that would work. That vision isn't coming true because of COVID, a lot of different reasons. But at the end of the day, when I think about DEX and I think about Staples, and you do a little research on Office Depot, you could pretty much assume that there's going to be a shakeup. And I said it before, I'll say it again here today, but I believe that Staples will in fact divest themselves of DEX, and I believe the Doyles will buy back DEX Imaging. Well, let's just say they're going to get a good deal. But what makes me think that? Ladies and gentlemen, like I just said, I think you got to look at Office Depot. You know, Office Depot is a publicly traded company, so Office Depot, we get to know the details of that organization. One of their shareholders, they don't have a big percentage of interest in Office Depot, but they have enough to talk to the board, to make recommendations to the board, and they want Office Depot to spin off all their services business. They want them to divest themselves of some acquisitions outside of retail that they've recently made. And the reason is they want to bring more value to the shareholders. They want to be able to buy back shares. I don't agree with what this equity player is telling Office Depot, but I also believe Office Depot is struggling just like Staples because they're putting the retail business first. We all know the retail business is going to hell in a handbasket, and I just don't think they know how to navigate toward anything different. And I want you all to remember, Office Depot took a big old ass whipping on CompuCon. Ladies and gentlemen, they sold CompuCon at a $750 million loss. You saw the episodes. I talked about it quite extensively when it happened. But they're not willing. I mean, at the end of the day, they weren't willing to do what they needed to do to make CompuCon work, in my opinion. And when leadership has the ability to fall back on what they're comfortable with, they'll always fall back on what they're comfortable with. But I believe that Office Depot is telling a story that retail businesses trying to get into the services space is probably not going to work. What they do with the retail business, you know, if they spun off all their services, the acquisitions they just made, maybe then Office Depot and Staples could come together and make some sense out of the declining marketplace and capitalize on the decline. But let's talk about DEX Imaging. So I'm going to show you a slide right now, and you're going to see all kinds of logos, but it's my storyboard. Stick with me. But when I think about DEX Imaging, let me get my magic pen working, because I'm sure I'm going to want to scribble all over this board. But when I think about DEX Imaging, I do think of them as the game masters regarding print. I think of them as the game masters regarding the print business and delivering print equipment and its services into the end user's office. When I think about my friend Frank Kook over there at Impact Networking, I think of him as the game master around managed services and what they're doing with managed services to disrupt that market. But DEX Imaging, it's about print. It's always been about print. And I believe DEX Imaging has the ability to not only monetize, but to profit off the decline of print. Because I think they'll put a strategy in place that'll allow them to do that. But let's talk about some of these roll-ups. Some of these roll-ups that are owned by private equity. If we start over here, we got the financial disaster section. And of course, we all know who we're talking about, and that would be Visual Edge Technology. And look, at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, I'm past people getting mad at me thinking I'm being mean at Visual Edge. I really don't care. They're a financial disaster. But they're owned by Ares Capital. Ares Capital brought in a first out lender in City of Capital. I shared my views on that. But at the end of the day, they're very, very vulnerable, and I predict that something will definitely happen with Visual Edge. I mean, Ares Capital has to divest themselves of this really bad investment they made. When I think about questionable financial positions, I think about UBO. This isn't a dig on UBO. You know, you're out in the market, you're doing what you believe is right. You're out there trying to grow a business. I get it. I appreciate that. But at the end of the day, there's been things that have happened with UBO since Centennial Partners did the acquisition with them. In February of 2022, they brought in a secondary lender called Churchill. Ladies and gentlemen, when you hit your debt ceiling with your main private equity and you bring in a secondary lender, there should be some kind of concerns. And I know some of you are going to say, well, we just read where UBO bought another copier dealer. Well, I appreciate that. You know, at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, private equity is not stupid, okay? I mean, some of their assets in the portfolio might be questionable, but they themselves are not stupid people. And they have visions and they have dreams, and sometimes those visions and dreams get challenged. And I believe the vision and dreams of private equity are definitely getting challenged. But if you think about it, you know, if you could go out and buy a copier business and roll that up underneath UBO and you can get an ROI in a couple of years, why not do it? If you can go out there and buy a depressed, maybe, copier business and just buy off the top, get rid of a lot of crap and throw it into your infrastructure, you probably get your ROI back pretty quick. And you might see some of these private equity groups, even though they're not exactly ecstatic about what they have, they might add to it, if adding to it can give them some profitability. And then I want you to look over here, and I call this section the little to no debt, but static investments. And that would be our friends over there at Marco. I don't think Marco's buried in kind of debt. I mean, you know, Norwest Partners did that deal buying Marco back in 2015. I mean, it's 9 years, okay? I don't think they're buried in debt. But I think they're buried in, well, I'm going to say status quo to a degree. You know, ladies and gentlemen, it's just my opinion. I'm going to say what I think. But I believe that Marco, well, they're just not, they don't have the entrepreneurial spirit at Marco anymore. Let me just put it that way. You know, I believe the gals, when they were there, they had a mission, they had a vision. And I think that's all changed. And I see Marco more in a management strategy. Let's manage what we got. We also would all have to assume that Marco's been for sale for a long time. They're struggling in selling that asset. Why is that? And I believe it's just too damn complicated of an asset for someone to buy. And spinning it, breaking it apart, seems to be hard for them to do. I still believe Marco will have to get split apart. IT going one way, the print going another way. When I think about Oval Partners, and and I've said this before, but I don't see Oval Partners as your typical private equity group. I see it more as a holding company. They got two assets, a roll-up called New Charter, which is all IT services, and then, of course, the big Flex Print roll-up, all print. But when you think about Oval Partners, I don't think they're buried in debt. I mean, they've been doing this for a while. And I think at the end of the day, I said it before, they could be milking the cow till there's no more milk. I mean, if Oval Partners is making some good income from Flex Print, keep it. If they got little to no debt, keep it. But at the end of the day, what are they really going to do with it, to grow it, to change it? I don't see Oval Partners and Flex Print having a mindset that I see the Doyles having. We're going to go out there and control the whole entire industry. So that means that Flex Print has to become part of somebody else who wants to control and change the whole industry. Or just sit there, stagnant if you will, and just milk the cow till there's no more milk. And then maybe if they got rid of it, they could focus on New Charter. New Charter is a whole nother story. I'll do a whole nother episode on it. I've done a couple on it now, but I don't believe that roll-up. I just don't believe rolling up IT companies is a good thing based on the way we rolled up copier businesses. Stay tuned for more on that. And then in the middle, you'll see I have Pacific Office Automation, and I have the word "the prize" above it. I think they are a prize. I think Pacific Office Automation is a prize for anybody that has a vision to completely disrupt the landscape of the print industry by buying up some assets that are within the print industry. Pacific Office Automation is probably the largest independently owned dealer, probably in the world, but we know it is here in the United States. I don't believe Pacific Office Automations has any debt, and if they do, it's probably very manageable, controllable debt. Good debt, as you call it. So whoever would gobble up Pacific Office Automation would in fact have a pretty good, well, they would have something that they could leverage, if you know what I mean. So it kind of makes sense. So how's all that work? Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that DEX Imaging is going to buy UBO. And the reason that I say they're going to buy UBO because I believe UBO is ripe for the picking. And UBO, I don't believe, is anywhere near the dysfunction as we see at Visual Edge. But I also believe that the investors behind UBO are looking at Visual Edge, thinking to themselves, we don't want to become Visual Edge number 2. So I believe that DEX Imaging could make a strategic play for UBO, and it would be pretty awesome. And that would give DEX quite a big revenue jump. We know that Dan Doyle has mentioned a couple of different times he wants to get to $1 billion. He wants to get to $1 billion. But at the end of the day, it's more than getting to $1 billion. I just don't think, I think Dan just doesn't want to freak out the whole marketplace. But he wants more than $1 billion. He wants to disrupt the landscape of the print business here in the United States. He wants to make it unrecognizable, and he wants to benefit from what others can't recognize. I also believe that DEX Imaging would have a great opportunity to gobble up the assets over there at Visual Edge IT. And when I say assets, I believe Visual Edge will end up in an asset sale. I mean, the debt that their BDC lender had to wipe out was just way too much. The equity position on the rest of that subordinate note, it's just a mess over there. So they literally, whoever buys Visual Edge is going to get a great deal on it. You know, if I'm Ares Capital, I'd rather be doing business with DEX Imaging than be doing business with someone that made me write off $47 million and take most of the equity in lieu of debt. And so there could be some opportunities for DEX Imaging to do something with Ares. And then, of course, you always, the big question, what happens with FlexPrint? That's a lot to bite off. That's a lot to bite off all at once. Buy UBO, buy the assets of Visual Edge, do something with FlexPrint. But ladies and gentlemen, the prize is POA. And I believe that if the Doyles really want to disrupt the landscape of the document imaging channel, they want POA. And could you imagine? Could you imagine POA, UBO, FlexPrint, Visual Edge, all underneath the leadership of Doyle? And by the way, buying POA gives DEX Imaging a pretty good leader in Doug. And if you think about the leaders in all these organizations, UBO, POA, FlexPrint, there would be an opportunity to really pick and choose the talent to take this new DEX Imaging to a whole nother place. I mean, you think about it, it'd be awesome. But ladies and gentlemen, I've been talking about a couple of things in our industry. The fact that UBO had to take on that secondary lender in February. The fact that Visual Edge is in a train wreck mess. And at the end of the day, I believe there has to be something to come of this, right? I mean, it's 2024. Something's got to come together. But the only way all this works is that DEX Imaging, well, they got to escape Staples. They got to get away from Staples. I believe that'll happen. They'll get away from Staples. And whether they work all this out with Sycamore Partners, Ares Capital, Centennial Partners, whoever those financiers are that come to the table, they're going to come to the table based on a complete disruption. They're not coming to the table based on a fantasy. We're going to put IT in all these accounts. They're going to come to the table because the Doyles are going to tell them we're going to change the landscape of the print business here in the United States to a point so bizarre, so aggressive, that we'll own it. That's what they're thinking, I'm sure. Ladies and gentlemen, let me share this with you. We all heard about the Southwest model, and I think that in order for DEX to be successful at this, they have to have a business model that's different than the model we have today. And when I think about the Southwest business model, I think about the fact that they use the same plane for the most part. I think about how much that benefits them. I think about an airline that understood the commodity airline flyer. In other words, Southwest doesn't have first class. Southwest went after the masses. But ladies and gentlemen, if you think about our industry, what do we need to do? We need a fixed service. We can't have equipment out there where we have technicians, bent over a copy machine. We got to get these things with less parts. One of the reasons I'm a big advocate of ink. I assure you, if DEX Imaging gets into this space, in my vision, ink's going to probably play a big part of it. If they get into this, in my vision, I believe you're going to see some, maneuvering around OEMs. How that looks, who knows? But I don't think DEX Imaging is going to go buy all these assets, completely disrupt the landscape of the industry, trying to do everything for everybody, trying to service every piece of equipment that's in the market. In the beginning, they'll sure have to do that. But over time, they're going to change that and fix that. I would think they would have to. It will be extremely disruptive. There's no doubt about it. Could you imagine the power they would have with OEMs? That deal I just described puts them about $1.6 billion, $1.7 billion in revenue. That's huge. Think about what they could do with that. But the only way it works is they got to make sure that they sell the way the buyers are buying. They got to deliver the way the buyers want it to be delivered. And quite honestly, ladies and gentlemen, the future, it's not going to be about how great your service is every time you show up. The future of print's going to be about the fact you don't need to show up and you can deliver great service. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. Let me wrap it up with this. I've discussed what I described as the COVID IT bubble. Now I suggest the bubble's going to explode. Private equity ran around and bought up a whole lot of crap during COVID, especially on the IT side. Thousands of investments. And I believe they're starting to realize a lot of that was, let me just share a couple of slides with you. The investors are waking up from the valuation fantasy, conquering the world dream. I think about the players in our space, these private equity groups, all the crap that these people told them. And I don't say they told them this crap maliciously. They just believed it themselves. We're going to go out there and put all this other stuff in these accounts. We're going to change the world. We're going to sell IT. And of course, you're an investor. You're thinking, man, they got thousands of accounts. They're going to sell all this stuff in those thousands of accounts. This is great. We got to do it. Well, it's been almost 10 years. It ain't working out the way any of them thought. And quite honestly, I believe they're all waking up to a real world nightmare of bleeding cash and failed fantasy strategies. They're waking up and they're going to make a decision. No one knows for sure what DEX Imaging is going to do, but they are empire builders. They're the right guys to do it. They can put the right team behind them. But something's going to happen because everybody watching me knows this. Status quo is the killer of all that'll be invented. Don't get stuck in status quo, and I'll see you all tomorrow.